Okay. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me for that talk, and I'm happy to share my master's research. So the title of my research is Provenance Study of Chinese Blue and White Porcelain in Southeast Asia, and which is from the Pattani in South Thailand. I'll go back. So the in ceramics is the most in Southeast Asian trade is the most valued. Um, it's been traded, and it's not just in the let's see, stoneware also were traded, but after 13th century, actually porcelain become prominent in the trading items, and we're all familiar about this, especially in the Philippines and other Southeast Asian sites. They were all recovered, and the picture here I just got this from the internet, but these are the common blue and white 14th century, the Ming and the Qing dynasty blue and white porcelain, and they come in va- vari va- variation in forms, bowls, jars, and all that. I'm sure all of you are familiar with different forms, plates, saucer, all that. And so I will talk about also, okay, blue and white. To introduce it is this porcelain, right? That is decorated under the glaze with this blue pigment, blue decoration. So for my uh, where the samples I studied is from Pattani in southern Thailand, as I point out here. And I give you this map showing this Southeast Asia, and the rest of China. Pinpoint the Jingdezhen and Jiangsu because they will come on their important in my research. So Pattani is Pattani is an ancient port. It was so there's a lot of historical information about the Pattani, but prior to um, after 1500, when during its formative uh, period, Pattani became incorporated to the conversion to Islam, and there's an archaeological evidence about that, the tombstones, and the involvement in the Chinese and European Southeast Asian trade networks, and also influence and incorporation into the Thai sphere of influence, and then economic um, rise. So let me see. Pattani has been Pattani has been it's been ancient port, but during the 16th century, um, they become prominent when the Portuguese came in, and the fall of the Malacca port. So Pattani came to its become critical part, and Chinese merchants prepared the Pattani route is because it's closer, and at the same time they have all these abundant resources such as forest products, gold, and tin, and they were valued with the Chinese. And in the 16th century, um, Westerners came in, the European came in, and that's when the Portuguese and the Dutch came in and having this trade, and Pattanis became one of the ancient port that plays big role. And so these are the sherds that I analyzed. teeny tiny sherds that we found in the archaeological sites. There's most of my samples are this blue and white, but I have a few that are stoneware and celadon. Not not all the sherds are in this picture, but I have 18 sherds of blue and white that I analyze. And those sherds were actually surface finds, and um, my advisor, Dr. Ayers, worked there in late 1980s and collected those sherds. And in my undergrad, I started those analyzed, so I continued throughout my master's research. So the method I use, I actually employ three methods here, but I start with petrography. And so petrography is this microscope with this specific lights that can, it will give you properties in the minerals and uh, and so what I use the petrography for is to investigate the characteristic in the paste, the minerals in the paste, and it will also allow me to look at the glaze and see what's in the glaze, and that is important in this ceramic analysis actually, especially the porcelain. And so first of all, so I just a quick one. I started with the stoneware, and so stoneware here you can see um, in this picture, quartz is A. It has all the quartz here, and feldspar, and there's igneous rocks, and iron oxide, and this carbon inclusion. So this is the information you can see in petrographic, and what you can um, see in this, what data you can, information this tells you is that, for example, this quartz and the feldspar they're in angular shape. They're still angular shape, and in geology, angular means rocks that has been still angular tend to have not traveled far from their source. So the angular you are, the closer you are to the source, to the outcrop, and the well-rounded you are, you have been traveled and you've been all smooth out through your travel method. so so what this tells me that the source of this the source of this raw materials, the temper, is that actually the igneous rocks tells me that this is a granitic outcrop, and it's continental source instead of an island origin source. And the iron oxide here in the paste, what information you can infer is that they were fired in oxidizing environment. So there's oxygen that's been get into the kiln, and the carbon inclusions here tells you that the temperature is not that high to melt all this carbon, and there's a porous here, there's the pores. Those were organic materials, the elongated ones, probably like a stem or some kind of plant materials that been part of the temper of the ceramics. And temper is very important in your ceramics to not burst, to keep them hold and kind of like resistant, to help resistant with the heat and maintain its form. And the next one is this blue and white stoneware. And so petrographic can tells you what the manufacturing and the technique of this. For example, here, the texture of the paste, there's quartz and feldspar, and you can see it's still like angular and still angular, and they're not being melted. And here in the B, you can see that the cobalt is applied before the glaze. And there's a bubbles in the glaze, and bubbles in the glaze are important too. And there's undissolved quartz and feldspar in the glaze, and there's anorthite in the glaze. So anorthite are phase minerals. And why is these minerals are important, you know, in the glaze? Well, it is important because certain minerals such as anorthite, they will only occurs when certain minerals dissolve. So anorthite is like from calcium plagioclase. I think if I remember, but they will pop out when like certain temperature reach. So anorthite actually is is the calcium oxide, and when the temperature reach 1100 degrees, anorthite forms in the glaze. So that tells you that this glaze reached to that certain temperature, and the quartz are still there. Quartz usually has 1500 degrees melting point, so they hasn't been melted. So your firing tells you that that temperature hasn't reached that high, and that's uh, one thing that this microscopic analysis is really important actually. And this one, it's same is a blue and white stoneware. And so actually one thing before here, I tell you that the body of the ceramic is, you see all this quartz hasn't been melted. And it just means that the body itself, the body, when they were fired, they were lower temperature than the glaze. So you see this cracking, this my the sherd has this crack, and that's because of the mismatch of the firing temperature between the body and the glaze. So this cracking occurs. And this is also the blue and white, and you can see the body here is still all this timber hasn't melted. It's everywhere, all this. And the most striking in this slide, in this sherd actually, is the sherd, and is the glaze that I can see that there's 5 layers of glaze. And you can see that here. I mean, I didn't know that if I didn't look this under the microscope. And so I see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers of glaze, and all the layers has all the glaze is in same composition. But in the layer 4 of 5, there's where some quartz and cristobalite and some mullite. And so what I infer from this sherd is that the body is heated relatively low temperature. And so the body actually is still a little bit porous, but think about it, they put 5 layers of glaze. 5 layers of glaze. They intend to make this pot durable. So your glaze, what glaze makes is to give your pot durability. And having that 5 layers of glaze tells you that the pot has that intention. And it's same, you can see the cracking of this is a mismatch between the glaze, heating of the glaze, and the body. And so actually these slides, this 5 and 2, they're blue and white, right? But there's somewhat stoneware in terms of they're somewhat in stoneware in terms of they're not heated as high. So I'll go here in this porcelain, my sherd, I example 9 and 14, and I call them as true porcelain. And why I call this true porcelain, you can see in the paste here, they're very fine and they're dense. And you can still see all these minerals here. They're kind of like birefringent minerals. That's mostly properties of like, example, like there's a lot of birefringent minerals, but commonly like muscobites. I think they're in like the muscobites, and you can see they're like fine and homogeneous, and the glaze here showing this round bubbles, and that is interesting, round bubbles. And there's also like this undissolved quartz, cristobalite, and anorthite. So round bubbles tells you that the temperature actually is been controlled. So when you have these uh, round bubbles, and they're like sim a little bit similar, like same shape and same size, that you can tell that um, the temperature has also a factor, that if it's been regulated or not. So for this, but my sample 9 and 14, there uh, because of this cristobalite and dissolved cristobalite appears when you're heated in between 1200 and 1400 temperature. So this porcelain, I have this most of my true porcelain, and they're all these characteristics. So I just put these 2 slides, but in when I see them, all I can see is that the because they're true porcelain, they're very fine, and it's actually hard to see what minerals are there. They're just teeny tiny. So I focus more on like what minerals I see on the glaze and what information that tells me. And this one is a celadon. It's a very common, a green glaze. And this one is just tells me that the petrographic shows that, the paste has all this carbon and all porous, and there's still minerals. You can see quartz minerals, and there's also anorthite here. Well, the body is fired low, but the glaze is also fired high temperature, and the quartz here are aggregates of quartz, is not as fine. So quartz is actually used for temper. So quartz is a very durable material. So it's common that quartz is used and put in the raw materials, as in the with your clay, to make it more durable. So in this case, because these quartz are not they're not are not from from the clay itself, is added in terms of the texture. They're different. Quartz has been quite chunky in terms of the clay. And so that was the one method I did. And so next method is XRF, so energy dispersive X-ray fluorescence. So it's a non-invasive, and so this is like the gun here. So it's like a gun, but it shoots out this energy, and it points for my sherds. It's important to understand when you use your XRF, like what spot you get your data of. For my analysis, I use it with just the white spot. So it's the glaze plus the paste, the inside, the paste and the body. So that's what I use. I try to avoid the blue, because it kind of like mix up my I could get some blue, and then others is hard for me to get the blue, is because the sherds are teeny tiny and the blues are not uniform in size. So I stick to be consistent. I use just the white part, which is the glaze and the paste. And this is example of the data of what you collected. So this just to give you. So this in parts per million. So there's more. XRF can tell you more, like 20 more elements, but I choose this one because these are the ones that's helpful to my analysis. And so with that, I use rubidium, strontium, and zirconium to cluster my sherds. And so here, with relative high rubidium, and I put this in the Jingdijin category. And within that Jingdijin category, there's a little bit outliers here too. And so I have this 5 so let me just go here. So I have this 5 that is a very different one, is the one, so it certainly have its own spot in the ternary plot. And the 2 has its own spot there too. But you can see Pat 17, Pat 19 with stylistic style. I mean, the stylistic, they were in the Ming Dynasty, 16th century, blue and white. And in that, I bring out Jingdijin because Jingdijin is the prominent count and the main producer at that time. And so, and Jiangsu here is also in China. It's also, I put it Jiangsu, and why I put it here in Jiangsu is because also you know Ellen Shea and Christian Fisher. So they did same kind of study of blue and white from Cebu and Banten in Indonesia, and they did this XRF too. And I see their paper, and I compare my data here of my Pattani 5 sherd, and that corresponds to falls to the Jiangsu classification of their study. And also I put this Raman spectroscopy, and what Raman does is it will give you different peaks. Usually Raman is used for like also mineral classifications and glass. So your ceramics, the glaze, it's a glass because it's made of silica. So glaze is made of like a lot of it is like silica, and silica actually is a glass. It's a glass forming. Silica is a glass forming. So so Raman can detect the peaks. There's some certain peaks, but I'll show you. This is like the peaks, and I gather the highest peaks, but I'll just show you this graph. It's hard to see, but the Raman helps me actually for chronology, associate my samples. So I'll show you. So this graph here, hang on a second. So my samples falls here. It's like in 7, you see this like 790, 1.5 polymerization index. And you see this at the top here, there were museum samples from the Jordan's Nature Museum here at the University of Oregon here. And these samples have dates. They have dates. So I compare my samples. So museum samples have this date of the Chinese Ming Qing period, 20th century Qing. The graph just tells me the most important thing this method tells me is that my sample, or most of my Pattani sample falls on the Chinese Ming Qing period, which is the 16th, 17th century. And that is true, like, you know, the intensity is kind of like the laser excitation in the glass. It just means that 20th century later ceramics have this high excitation is because they were you know, when they were put in the kiln, they have this higher temperature they were put in high temperature. So they have high degree of polymerization. It's quite technical, but the high degree of polymerization means a high degree of becoming a glass, kind of like that. So it does means it has some kind of relation to firing temperature. I'm not gonna dwell with so much of the technical uh, on this method, but the most important thing is is my path is my shares correlates to the Ming and Qing period, which is associated with historical period, and it's been associated with historical period that this blue and white entered in the Pattani area when it's the peak of its trading. So conclusion of this research. So microscopic analysis is useful in investigating the manufacturing processes as well as the firing conditions. So firing conditions of the ceramics. So most of my samples, the the pure the I call the true porcelain, they were fired in like between 1200 1400 degrees Celsius. At the same time, I have sherds that were actually under fired and kind of like bit falls in the stoneware porcelain category, like in the middle. It's not like true porcelain. And the XRF shows that the zirconium, the rubidium, and strontium are useful for class differentiating and shared cluster to manufacturing sources. And the most blue and white sherds are in Pattani are associated to the Jingdigen. And Raman Spectroscopy provides insight on the chronology of the sherds. Most of the Pattani samples cluster in the Ming, early Qing, 16th, 17th century. And blue and white from Jingdigen and Jiangsu, as well as the glazed stoneware and some earthenware manufactured in Thailand were part of the trading system on the east coast of the Malay Peninsula in the 16th and 17th century. So thank you, and that is my my presentation. and yeah, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Angelica. I think I have a lot of questions. So for everyone who's watching, if you have a question, you can raise your hand and we can call you to unmute, or alternatively, you can put it on the chat and we'll read it out loud. And if you're very shy, you can direct it to me, Anna, or Ara, whose username is AMSPigar. So I think there's some couple of questions. I actually have some other questions, but I think Dr. Paz, are you raising your hand? Yes.
Right. Thank you very much, Isa, for sharing your research, your original research for your master's. I've learned a lot, and I see it's a solid research. You applied different techniques on a very I have to say small sample of and very small sherds.
Right.
And that's not the point. That's the point actually, that it doesn't matter what its original context is. You're testing if all these wonderful methods can be used to pursue more information out of the sherds that we find in archaeological sites. And blue and white, of course, is very ubiquitous in Southeast Asia, especially in the last 500 years, and especially in the last 200 years. And though, as you pointed out, there's no real problem identifying where they came from nowadays. If you have a large pot or large piece of the artifact, but if you only have a small sherd, and then this is something that you can really use. Or if you want to make sure that at least differentiate what is the dominant source of your sherds, then this is also very good. So I'm very pleased by what you did, and I have a couple of questions though. Do you think, for example, we can use the XRF and then use your preferred trace elements without really going through the process of thin sectioning and using the other techniques that you use? Can we go straight to the XRF and then use a clustering and create, and we will get this kind of result of clustering?
I mean, yes. And in terms of you have your chemistry, you have your compositional data, and actually there's a big database on this, all of these elements now. There's a lot of scholars doing compositional analysis, and as long as you know what specific elements you're using to, what you're using, and what is your question. And for example, I use zirconium, strontium, and rubidium, right? And for my sample, I use that because that helps me clustering my sherds. If I use aluminum, calcium, there are a lot of numbers there. I try to graph this, and you don't give me this clustering. So
you think it with your, so you have your data and then you try to see what's the best
yes, and that is, and I found that this trace element, zirconium, actually is a very good element, is a very resistant to weathering in terms of physical and chemical weathering. They're resistant. So your zirconium is actually a good element, is the one that is closest to your source. So zirconium could not travel as far. So that's actually a good trace element. And zirconium and rubidium, they serve as kind of like calcium and see, I not quite think where my zirconium and rubidium falls through, but there are good elements to as a trace element. Use trace element compared to these major elements. That is for my research is helped me, and I think with the blue and white zirconium, this trace element is helpful in terms of your pigment. Then you use different elements in terms of like your cobalt and your manganese and all that, and graph and see where it falls through.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question, Dr. Paz.
Thank you very much.
I think Anna, your microphone.
Sorry. Yes. Sorry. I apologize. Okay. So you were saying earlier about the 5 layers of glaze. You mentioned that it's just one sherd, or is this a usual production technique that's being used for other materials?
Oh, I for my sherds, for my sample, I only have that one sherd that has that 5 layers of glaze, and I'm not familiar with how many of these have, because actually there's not much. There's been research about petrographic of porcelain, blue and white, like porcelain, but I think for some researchers there will be not there's petrographic there for sure, but sometimes because porcelain is hard to make thin section itself, it is hard to grind, and I did it myself. I mean, I tried this making a slides, and it needs skills. So that's only one sherd for on this one that have 5 layers, but I'm sure there's more, there's plenty out there. There's plenty out there that doing those techniques, and I think it's those technique, having the 5 layers are important in the production of processing, technological of processing of this blue and white, because glaze gives you those durability effect, to keep your water in, so I'm sure, like I'm sure there's more out there, and we have to look those articles.
Yes, it's actually interesting. I'm also actually interested in the what you termed as the true porcelain versus some blue and whites that look like they're porcelain, but apparently they're stoneware, right? Am I
Yeah,
correct? Okay.
yeah, yes, yeah.
Eh,
So looking back at the sherds, I mean, this picture here, these 2 and 5, I categorize them as porcelain, stoneware, like in that transition. It's not uh pure porcelain in terms of this. You see this 9, 12, 16, they're all like really fine. Texture wise, part 2 and part 5, they're still coarse. The paste is still coarse, and you can see that in petrographic, you can see that some minerals hasn't melted. You can see that there's still like organic materials there that hasn't been melted. So what I consider as true porcelain, I mean, not me myself, I mean, in terms of other scholars out there, true porcelain is heated within a high temperature, 1200, 1400 degrees Celsius. So, I mean, that is just, I call it here a stoneware, right? Because they're under fired, and stoneware is, we have this earthenware, stoneware, porcelain, in terms of ceramic type. So that the term comes from.
Okay. I may have missed this in the initial because my internet was choppy. But did what type of site was it? Is it a trading area or where
Yeah,
these were found? Sorry.
yeah. So the shares were from Pattani. So it's actually the site is like in a Ban Crusade area. Um, I I'm not familiar as as the site. I haven't been there, so I mostly not as much familiar. But it's the Pattani site itself is uh trading port. It's a between, it's not just, it's like Southeast Asian use it, and the European use it too.
All right. And if it's are you so it's not a household. It's just really
Oh yeah,
okay.
this okay. Yeah, to clarify, yeah, you missed that. So these were like
Sorry.
surface finds. So these were surface finds that my advisor used to work, did his survey there, and collected the sherds, and that where he collected is that near the ancient used to be ancient port, and he told me that all these sherds has been there. A lot of just shattered.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you can the technique that you're using was also looking at the chronology. So
Yes, yes.
I really like that you managed to you added the information from museum materials that you know were 20th century. So you could see the materials used for archaeological materials. Are you looking into expanding this in other analysis or other materials with?
Other materials I mean, I have a small subset of these sherds here. So if I need to further my research, then I need to look at uh, other blue and white sherds. I know in the Philippines there's a lot there that hasn't been quite analyzed. I know there's some has analyzed, but there's plenty of sherds there that hasn't been touched. So that can be in the future. And yeah, I'm not I'm not closing my mind about all that. And actually this is also a beginning for me to actually explore this kind of techniques, right? Um this kind of technique is you need to fully understand that the theory and behind that. So certainly to be
Yeah, explored.
needs
Yeah. Yeah.
to develop.
Uh, okay. Dr. Paz has another question.
Yeah, so I was just thinking the another implication of your work. Okay, nowadays in the 21st century, the sourcing of specific design, porcelain, ceramic, and kilns in China and Southeast Asia, it has exponentially advanced, and that's all very well. But what's wonderful with your technique is it can be a check whether we are indeed uh, seeing material from our sites, and then immediately, because of the advances in our study of kilns, that we can say that they came from those kilns. You see, the problem is fakery has been going on for centuries, and because there's so much fakery going on, something that must it could be that the design element is from Jingdeng Chen, but it was made somewhere else. And so a technique
Right.
like this, and when I say it's been going on, I'm seeing centuries.
Yeah.
Or so this industry of fake ceramic has been there forever, and and so this is going to be a quite interesting approach. And like Anna said, it doesn't have to be in good context. It can just be uh, from the Philippines, right, or from Luzon, or from a museum collection, and it doesn't look to be destructive altogether. Uh, this kind of approach. So if this can be pursued further, it will be interesting to see if that can if you can contribute to that kind of, uh, of concern. The other thing is I'm not expecting you to know this because your study is very focused. But have you heard of the Islamic Kate design for blue and white and Islamic Kate? We had
Islamic.
we have a master's thesis,
Mm-hmm.
Natasha Quintanar, who
Mm-hmm.
studied Islamic Kate designs. Their design elements in blue and white usually that were made for the Islamic market. And because you introduced the site as eventually it became Islamic, I was just
Mm-hmm.
wondering if there's a representation of that in the site. But like I said, you were very focused, no? Um,
Right.
but didn't Pattani have a monograph, or does it have a site report or a monograph?
Yeah, yeah, there is there's been some articles about the site and archaeological findings on the site, and types of ceramics has been found on the site. Um, but I wasn't quite aware in terms of like in the blue and white in terms of the motif. What actually I see here is this, this pot 18 is of crack style. So it's in the late 16th, early 17th century crack style that is actually for European markets.
Yes.
And so Pattani as a port, and the European use that this crack style has, been we recovered that one. And some of this motif here, this part 9 is this human form, kind of like scalar form that emerged in the 16th century. So I think I read Quintanar's research about those
Islamic.
Islamic motif, and I'm sure there's those also probably in the Pattani area. I just need to explore.
So there was a lot of so you mentioned coming on from that perspective. So you mentioned that there's a lot of Islamic groups there, but that was around 16th century or earlier.
Those were those were actually in the 15th, 14th, 15th century. I haven't actually really looked at in terms of the culture on the Pattani. What I when I did my research, I cannot just overview of the site itself, but there's been a publication about what it was before all this ancient before this before 16th 17th century. Before that, there's this kingdom there, Islamic kingdom, and yeah, there we just have to look or go back to those archaeological reports. And there's a paper that so there's paper here that have all this Welch and McNeil 1989 and Jory 2013, and there's more. I'm sure there's more that going back to this article. You can see what Pattani was in that time. Pattani was in that time, and what all those archaeological finds can tell you the culture of the Pattani.
I'm thinking, are there that you mentioned that this is a port area, so of course the exchanges are being done through the sea, but are there you mentioned that there's earthenware that's also being traded in, or are the earthenwares also coming in from that area within the local area, and they're also being exported?
Yeah. So this part 1 is a stoneware, and it has and this 6 and this 8 these were of Thai manufacture design. Looking at stylistic design, these were like made of Thai, and here is part 28 is a Celadon common in the northern Thai, and they're in the northern Thai and come to the south. So you can see that there's still be associated within the trade. Now, how much we see, how much in terms of quantity wise, it seems like in this 16th 17th century they're still traded, but they're not large quantity traded. It's the porcelain is the most in terms of quantity is can be seen um, more demand of this blue and white, and that is
in the market, yeah.
yeah, in the market. And that is true, especially when Europeans got all this interest and came in and have all this interest with the art, the Chinese art, all this blue and white porcelain.
It just occurred to me. Are there evidences? Of course, there might be, but are there evidences of shipwrecks near the area, and that might be associated to the same timeline as the materials that you looked at?
Mm, I have not explored, but I certainly there's a lot of shipwreck, right? There's I'm sure there's of course like the the in the Indonesia area. I mean there's shipwrecks there. We can see those published articles. So
These can be
I actually
compared, I think.
that's a good thing, Anna. You know, I maybe part of my I did this research. Part of my research is to kind of like constrain
Yeah.
to my methods, right?
Yeah.
And it's more on methodology.
Mhm.
What my research was more on methodology than of what's around.
Yeah. And I was it's interesting because I think you touched on the method of the production techniques, and then
Mm-mm.
as Dr. Paz was mentioning, you can also start to see where uh, which area these materials are coming from, so you can look at the sourcing, you can look at the production techniques, but there's also the question of what was being well received, I guess, in that area. You can check out, and you can compare it from, I was thinking already, compare it with land versus nearby shipwrecks to see if, because of course shipwrecks presents a different uh, period, because that's already just uh, one frozen time frozen machinery or some frozen landscape. But here in a port, it's continuously adding. It's a busy site. People from different areas are coming, and different identities are grouping themselves within this one area. So there's always going to be a different exchange. But using the techniques that we're using on the land materials, then if you can compare it with, I don't know, different shipwrecks around the world, and to see if,
Mm.
because the concept of, as Dr. Paz was saying, the concept of copying might be uh, might have also played into this trading needs, and it can also eventually lead to identity. As mentioned in the Islamic designs, there was an active market for a particular type of design, but is the techniques for production are based on the people who were actually making the material, also filling, are there different people who are different production areas who are filling that market need. I was thinking here, I have my notes here. Maybe I didn't write it down. It's interesting to see how it could have been how it could have been received based on the area, and then you can go further. What are the other ports within the area, within Thailand? And I think it's very interesting to look into. Even now, the method that you use is I didn't know a lot about the things that you mentioned, so I really learned a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think there might still be questions, but if not, I will. Ira, are you still here?
No more questions on my end.
Okay. Thank you very much, Angelica. I will formally end this talk, but if it's okay, I will. By formally ending the talk, I will stop the recording. But if you can stay behind, because
Yeah.
with some people might be shy and have some more questions, I have some other questions as well.
Okay.
But I think that's already wrap. And thank you very much for your talk. I really learned a lot and I appreciate this. And thank you to everyone who joined us. This is also a wrap for the 2020 BINALOT Talks. Next year, I think we're still going to be doing the talks online. So we will have some talks, I think we will start on January 20 with our student who will talk about their studies on linguistics, and another ASP student who will talk about their excavation experience in Georgia in Europe. So, and then on February we will have more. So please stay tuned and like our BINALOT Talks Facebook. And I guess that's Merry Christmas to everyone and Happy Holidays. Enjoy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.